There we go. Yeah, that's perfect. All right, cool. All right, I'm ready to go. I saw a debate the other day that made me stop for a second. Rooney or Neymar? And I think my first reaction was, this doesn't make any sense. My body might have even tensed up, not because it's an impossible debate. They just don't even feel like they belong in the same sentence, because it feels like two completely different questions are being asked at the same time. Rooney, Neymar. But the more I thought about it, the more I sat with it, and I sat with it some more, the more I realized something uncomfortable. The debate isn't the problem. The comparison is. So today we talk about it. Welcome to I Remember It Differently. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I remember it differently. Memory versus reality. Narrative and recollection. The show about the way we remember things, not necessarily how it happened. Football, music, movies, and the odd tangent. So let's head over to the dugout. Neymar versus Rooney. The same player. The wrong debate. The initial comparison came from a misunderstanding taken out of context. A snapshot of Rooney's overall point was zoomed in on, and from the optics, it left slightly too much room for misinterpretation. Rooney's conversation on the overlap was a great convo. So much insight was shared. But, you know, as a lot of great long-form content goes these days, the clickbait rises to the surface and like a floating bobblehead, and the substance falls to the ocean bed for only those brave enough to dive deeper. And it always feels like more of us prefer the surface, but doing this show has taught me otherwise. Rooney is one of the most interesting individuals I have had the pleasures of meeting and speaking to. And truth be told, his humility is a cloak that covers up aspects of who he is that the football world will never know. And he probably wants it that way, right? But anyone lucky enough to connect with him, in my opinion, will always be left shocked by how many layers he has. But that shock is our problem, not really his. Because very rarely are football players as decorated and talented ever not layered human beings. But let's stay on topic. As I understood it, Rooney never denied Neymar's talent and greatness. It was simply a personal admission that in real time he never considered him top in terms of Ronaldo and Messi stature. Which to me isn't a crazy statement to make, agree or disagree. It's not a crazy take. That is at least how I interpreted it. But who am I to speak for anyone but myself? But see, whether he's right or wrong is neither here nor there. The reverberations of that conversation are far more important, because what it led to, my goodness, the Neymar Massive and They Are Massive came out in droves, and they threw Rooney straight in the ring with said name he spoke of, and it started. Who is better? This one, that one. The back and forth was mixed with disbelief, arrogance, disrespect. It was violent. The internet went crazy. The Neymar fans couldn't believe that the Rooney fans had the audacity, and the Rooney fans looked back and said, silly rabbit, tricks are for kids. See, at first I cringed like I ripped open a toxic waste suite and clenched my fist. I scrunched up my face like the first time I heard So Large in the cypher spit, bite it, bust down 36 ounces. Real can't fit in my trousers. I got the whole strip bouncing. I thought, this is a weird comparison. Such different players. How did we get here? I have so much respect for both. I didn't even want to open the door to the house. I stood on the porch. I stood in the doorway, in the driveway, trying to peek into the house to see what room everybody else was in. The poets will appreciate this one. I was trying to figure out how close the Hall of Fame was to the front door before I even considered going in the house. This one was dangerous, and I didn't want to get involved. I just didn't want to open Pandora's box. I did not know where it was going to take me. But then I sat with it, and I sat with it, and I sat with it longer, and it dawned on me. They're the same person. Now, before you throw your toys out the pram, what I just said sounds ludicrous, but stick with me like a moth to a flame, like a bee to a honeycomb, like a breastfed baby to a nipple. When I say Neymar and Rooney are the same person, I am not talking about their footballing abilities, their careers, no. In fact, the way they play the sport couldn't be further apart. But what I am referring to is the reason as to why the way they play football couldn't be further apart, and that is cultural. Rooney is to the English what Neymar is to Brazilians. They are both the cultural perfection of the sport and how it should be played to the cultures that they represent. If you were to ask every Brazilian what the ideal perfect Brazilian football player blueprint would be, it would be Neymar da Silva Santos Jr. Or at least he would be the closest thing to it that they have seen. Forget career, pure football, skill set, ability, FIFA, create a player from scratch and build him brick by brick. The majority of Brazilians will point to Neymar. The same way if you were to ask every English person what the ideal perfect English football player blueprint would be, the majority would be Wayne, Wazza, Rooney. Jude might be creeping up on the list though, but Rooney currently stands. Or similarly, he'd be the closest thing to it that we have seen. Let it sink in. Neymar is every Brazilian's perfection, as is Wayne every English person's. There's less friction on Wayne's side and more on the Brazilian side, but that friction isn't questioning his talent, it's questioning career. Don't believe me? Go look at the way every Brazilian legend you would rank above Neymar speaks of his talent and ability. I would go as far to say Neymar might be the most talented Brazilian footballer of all time. But here is the part where the conversation gets a lot trickier for people. Talent is not career. Talent is not success. And sometimes separating the two is a difficult conversation, so let's add color to it. Best and greatest aren't always synonymous. R9 is greater than Neymar. Ronaldinho is arguably greater than Neymar. Pele is greater than Neymar, and arguably a few other Brazilians. But greater is not restricted to talent. Greater is a mixture of ingredients, impact, storyline, feeling, memory, how they were immortalized, and much more. But I believe Neymar has a case of being the best football player of all the above. Greater and best are interchangeable here depending on what meaning you attribute to what word. But what I'm hitting on here is there is a distinction here that exists with two different meanings. So pick whatever two words you want. What I'm trying to emphasize and what many fail to conceptualize is there is no madness involved in a conversational debate that hinges on the thesis that Neymar might be the most talented Brazilian we have ever seen kick a football. In football, talent isn't always actualized and very rarely do players truly reach their potential. And reaching said potential is oftentimes gift wrapped as them getting better technically, becoming more clinical, or waiting for something to present itself that isn't already present in their game and ability. But what happens when the play in question arrives perfect? Some would argue he was better at 18 than he is now, but what I'm trying to emphasize, his game wasn't missing much at 18, maybe just experience. The same way Wayne Rooney at 16 was a complete footballer too. Messi arrived perfect, R9 arrived perfect. Some greats do, others outwork everyone, and that's just as impressive. CR7's story is one of the greatest for that reason. What Neymar and Rooney lacked at 16 and 18 were the things only experience could give them. So the question of reaching their potential no longer hinged on strides in performance, it hinged on the storyline and how it played out. It hinged on how they mythologized their apotheosis. And the thorns of being so talented are that our expectations as spectators are sometimes unrealistic. Uncle Ben to Peter Parker. With great power comes great responsibility, as cliche as it sounds. But the kicker is, how greatness is defined is typically how the talent marries the storyline. And people act like it's not. Like, come on guys, right? I hate to break it to you, but this is entertainment. And at the highest level, it's what I like to call WWE, right? The storyline is inseparable. Neymar's only flaw isn't his performances or trophies, because he won abundantly. It's how the storyline played out, right? Diego Maradona, possibly one of the most villainized greats of all time. But when he left Barcelona to move to Naples, Barca offered him a 5-year deal and a blank check. AC offered him a blank check also. And you know what his response was? I'd rather chase the ball than chase money. I'm going to Naples. They're waiting for me there. Maradona joined a team that escaped relegation by 1 point the season before he joined. And a team in financial turmoil, constantly disrespected politically, geographically, and more. The Northern Giants looked down on the Southern city figuratively, literally, and every other Lee you can imagine. It is insane, right? But Maradona arrived and Napoli's fate changed. Maradona achieved success in a lot of places, but what he did at Napoli is where he wrote his story into the box office. Of course, what he did for Argentina, but come on, man, I'm making a point here, right? That's why there's a statue of him in Naples. That's why the stadium is named after him. Storylines are just as important in football as they are in any other form of entertainment. Every player's career is a movie. Some are just better movies than others. Some start great and veer off somewhere. Some are comedies. Some are romances. Unfortunately, some are horrors. And if you're lucky enough, it's all the above. At Barcelona, Neymar was on top of the world. But maybe he didn't like the fact the throne was Messi's. Cool, that might be plausible. But let's not forget, Neymar carried that Barca team when Suarez was banned by FIFA and when Messi had the only major injury he's had in his career. But where the story goes after that is what makes one wonder. When it's all said and done, what location do you build Neymar's statue in? Look, Ronaldinho crashed, but my goodness, Ronaldinho crashed with pizzazz, with fireworks, a whole production and a smile on his face. It was a story worth the box office, even if it was short-lived. But Neymar's story, it feels painstaking at times, even cringeworthy. And that's what hurts the most, you know? But let's make one thing very clear. If we strip away the storyline, he is everything every young Brazilian football player ever aspired to be. With every young Brazilian player pretending to be a pro in their house or outside, getting shouted out by their parents, Neymar is the talent they envision and pray to the football gods to be blessed with. He's the Brazilian prototype to a T. And I said it before, you think I'm lying? Go ask the greats you would name before him respectfully and they'll all tell you the same. But this is an example of how being the best and the greatest aren't always synonymous, and that's okay. But again, the story that is written is the story we remember. We may never see a Brazilian talent more talented. Accolades, trophies, schisms and all cool. Someone may score more, win more, even be heralded more. Not in our lifetime will we see one more talented, and if we do, not for a long time. He is, however, undeniably written in history for his contributions. I'll be honest, I didn't find out Ronaldinho played at Grêmio until I was playing Championship Manager 99 as a kid. I'm sure I didn't learn about R9's career start at Cruzeiro until Football Manager. I might River Plate until he was at Valencia. The list is endless. I didn't truly know most South American talents until they came to Europe growing up or played at international tournaments. But all of us YouTube babies remember checking into the Brazilian league for the first time in real time to watch this young prodigy at Santos. We didn't just check him out, no, we kept up to speed. Where 19-year-old Neymar became the first and only player to be nominated for a Ballon d'Or while playing outside of the European leagues at 19. He sits as a key part of arguably the greatest front three of the modern era in MSN. Maybe only a conversation between MSN and BCB, Benzema Bell and CR7. BCB is really named after the TV channel, but I don't want the headache that comes with its other name, right? What a joy their journey was to watch. The infamous image of Suarez's wife in the backseat and Messi in the passenger seat will forever be a memory at heart. And the periods where all the stars aligned and all three were healthy and present, we were amazed by Barcelona's sheer wizardry. They were kicking out teeth. Records were obliterated, and just to name a few, most goals scored in a single season by an attacking trio, 131 goals in a season. I might re-download MSN Messenger just for the sake of it. To make matters worse, the single season record broke BCB's previous record of 122 goals. And you want to know what's even crazier? Suarez missed the first 2 months due to a FIFA ban. 364 goals in 110 games in 3 seasons, averaging 3 goals a game, 173 collective assists in that time. That wasn't 3 individual players, it was a trio. And I believe no one can take that from him. But there does exist a category of greatness for players who we respect but wish we got more from, or didn't achieve the accolades we expected, or didn't achieve at all but we knew who they were. Owen with no injuries. What would have been? Ben Arthur stuck around longer. Hazard showed up to Madrid fit. If JJ Okocha and Matt Letizia accepted offers from larger clubs, who would they have been? If Anelka didn't go to Madrid too early? If Gaza went to United? If Adriano didn't lose his pups the way he did? Look, I'm not comparing any of these players to Neymar, I'm just exercising my train of thought. And a player of that caliber ending his career with no Ballon d'Or does hurt. See, R9 is my favourite Brazilian. And I would argue that the talent he possessed was otherworldly, right? But my argument would be that R9 is him. But the kids can't really replicate R9. And there's no template on how to do that again, right? That sounds like a contradiction to my point. And it's funny that despite Neymar being the flashier one of the two and the one who mastered his relationship with the football like no other, the tougher player to produce is probably still R9. If we took 2 5-year-olds and trained one in the footsteps of Neymar and the other in the footsteps of R9, the likelihood is the kid trained in Neymar's footsteps gets a lot closer to Neymar than the kid trained in R9's footsteps. But it's the reason that eliminates the contradiction. Nature has had too much of a heavy hand in creating El Fenomeno, and the killer that he wasn't something you could really coach. But Neymar, he mastered football. And mastering football, we might be able to replicate. Because mastering football from a technical aspect is like technology. Technology. Yeah, you see it, right? But what I mean is, we don't know a technological breakthrough is possible until it happens. And when it does, it forces us to now dream beyond the advancement until the next one. And technique is the same. We don't know a certain level is attainable until someone gets there. And that gives permission for the next gen to go beyond that. And Neymar showed us it's possible, but R9 showed us it's impossible. It's up for debate. You let me know who you think is harder to replicate. I have no shame in admitting when I'm wrong, and I think that's a great conversation. You know, the thing that I love about R9 that he doesn't get enough credit for? Yeah, we speak about his greatness, etc., him pre-knee injury, coming back and still being great. But The thing that people sleep on with R9 is that he dominated the world at 2 different weight classes. Do you know how insane that is? No, please. Like 2 different weight classes. I put on a few kg and feel like I'm wearing an astronaut suit. Like, let me put on a few pounds. Oh, I'll feel like I'm in a different body. It's crazy. Man, Maradona even tried, but it didn't quite work out the same when he started putting on weight, right? 98 and before R9 is a cruiserweight champion. And 02 onwards R9 is a heavyweight champion. I don't think he gets enough respect for that. 2 different bodies, especially when his first body was so explosive. Look, the second one still had a spring that someone his size with a bad knee shouldn't have had too. But the difference was clear. And let's be clear, R9's hat-trick at Old Trafford where he got the standing ovation from the United fans, that was heavyweight Ronnie, right? Who remembers Ronaldo v Football on PS1? Classic. Bellini Samba de Janeiro. Da na 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 na. Good times, man. Look, I do think a lot of people would easily crown him the most talented. But for the sake of art, I get to embellish the truth. But I do actually believe Neymar has the wider ranging skill set. But it is biased and I'll explain my own bias. How many people are that honest? His playmaking abilities give him access to more parts of the game. Parts that R9 probably didn't care for, being that he was a striker, right? Neymar's always occupied more of the game by nature as a winger, playmaker. R9 was a killer like no other and a true number 9. The wider skill set could just be positional, but it would still ring true. Neymar's closer to Ronaldinho than Ronaldo on the Brazilian spectrum in terms of the type of player they are, playmaker, etc. But I say all that to say, R9's storyline is greater than. His mythology is well balanced. Who we thought he could be and who he showed up as are closer in comparison. And his asterisk was his knee, but despite that, look at what we saw. But every great player has their shortcomings. R9 is probably the greatest player to never win the UCL. But 2 Ballon d'Ors, 2 World Cups. And 2 Ballon d'Ors is important because between 1990 and 08, no player alone except him has won it twice. Although he didn't really feature in 94, his future was written already. And he probably helped Romario stay on his toes to be the MVP he ended up being. Romario was aware a new regime was about to begin, and he got his heart broken in the shift. It's well documented. But I just wanted to give R9 his flowers, but this isn't about him. It's about Neymar. But follow me, because when you look at Wayne, we end up in a similar place. Not the storyline though, because Wayne's story actually played out well, but we'll get to that too. When you envision the most English football player you can imagine that exists, who ticks all the intangibles that English people love, grit, talent, passion, humility, would die for the team, go wherever he's needed for the team, maybe even a screw loose, technical mastery, laser precise accuracy, efficiency, simplicity that is complex, and enough power to take off the roof of a net, you get Wayne Rooney. Harry Kane's probably the most technically complete, but he doesn't have anywhere near the grit and dog that Wayne Rooney did, and those are key qualities of the English game. Wayne Rooney against Newcastle might be the truest personification of all these attributes that I'm describing. From arguing with the ref 1 minute in the heat of passion to turning around and catching a volley off guard so beautifully and putting it top bins, it doesn't get more English than that. The English have such little patience for immaturity, so much so that the perfection of English football couldn't have been anything but a grown man at 16. We wouldn't want it any other way. Rooney made his debut against Tottenham, but to most of us in our memory, the day he arrived was against Arsenal 8 games later. It was at that moment we all collectively agreed, we know what this is. And if you were to pick any player, past, present or future, who you would bet your last on to play any position, 1 through 11 on a football pitch, and play every position the most consistently in comparison to each other at the highest level, I said a lot. And it does make sense, I promise. Let me simplify it. What English player would play every position on a pitch better than any other? The safe money is Wayne Rooney. You can stick Wazza right back, left back, centre back, in goal, DM, CM. It doesn't matter. You're going to get the same Wayne in every position. And that is the most English compliment you could have for an English player. Remember the Nike advert of United training where he puts the gloves on and plays rush goalie? See? None of us watched that and thought, he would never. We all watched that and thought, sounds about right. Rooney was mentally unfazable, man. You couldn't rock him or knock him off his pivot. If Rooney had a bad game, it wasn't pressure or nerves. Wayne was solely responsible. Mentality monster. That's English. Same with Jude. Mentality monster. I like that term, mentality monster. It's here to stay. Look, I don't say that to bash us. It's about accepting our true philosophy and identity. The ultimate street striker to us was Wayne Rooney for a reason. But to Brazilians, it's Neymar. They define the sport to the culture they represent. The closest thing to the perfect footballer that exists in both of their cultures, and that is why I say they're the same person. They both play football in two different ways, so please don't misconstrue what I am saying. But I'm not looking at the flower of the plant. I'm looking at the root. Rooney and Neymar aren't individual players. They're mythology manifested. They're ideas in motion. What happens when the crazy science experiment goes right? But maybe it's also proof how even the perfect machine can malfunction. Now, there are a few strikingly eerie parallels that do make it more revealing. They both were touted to be their international team saviors, and injury and misfortune hurt them in moments we thought they would write their names all over. Rooney 04 Euros, quarter-final, metatarsal injury against Portugal, a breakout tournament in which he showed so much promise. 06 World Cup, injury metatarsal as well. Questions about whether he'd be fit. Country argued whether it made sense to bring him, or we could have brought a healthy Defoe. Let Rooney heal. Hindsight echoes. He played through it, visibly frustrated. He couldn't be himself. It affected his rhythm, and by and large, probably a contributing factor that led to his red card against Portugal. Portugal might be the problem here, but let me focus. 2010, post-season ankle injuries, fitness in question. None of these take away from Rooney's greatness, but when we remember what happened in real time, it isn't as linear as we remember, because Neymar internationally, similar fate. 2014 at home, fractured vertebrae in the quarterfinals against Ecuador. The parallel's getting a bit clearer. Not only did it rule him out of the rest of the tournament, it was right before the 7-1 nightmare. The nightmare that took place at home. See, getting punched up is one thing, but getting punched up in your own house, where you pay rent and lay your hat, different type of dark that. Brazilians felt abandoned by Neymar. That was his moment to bring it home at home. And he didn't even have to pay shipping fees for the trophy. It was already local. Then, sadly, in 2019, he's ruled out of the Copa with an ankle injury, and they win it without him. The optics are unkind. Then in 2021 Copa, they put everything on his back and they make it to the final, and he's present. But they lose to their arch nemesis and rivals, Argentina. More misfortune. Some say it was stolen, but history doesn't remember the robbed. But those who remember that tournament know he was sensational. An ankle injury in 2022 that disturbed him all tournament, and they fell short, right? And then 2026, a gruesome injury run up to the tournament that was filled with doubt. And regardless of how the tournament played out, we were never going to get Neymar at even 80%, right? Because let's be honest, he struggled all season. I think he even had surgery this season, right? And other than the first game of the season, no player is ever 100%. After you rack up some mileage and some seasons under your belt, come the first day of the season, you might not even be at 100%. What most people who have never competed at a high level don't grasp is that competing at a high level isn't about being at your best. We're all amazing at our best. It's about how efficient and effective you can be when you're not at your best. How good are you at 60%, 55%, 75%? Because the moments you get the luxury of being at 90% and above are few and far between. Simplify it. Think about life in general. Everyone's an amazing person uninterrupted on their best day. There's probably very few humans who are intolerable on their best day. But life throws some twists and turns, some heartache, some bills, some stress, some doubts a person's way. And now the question isn't who are you at your best, but who are you most of the time? Because I might not get to experience you at your best a lot. And sometimes, maybe not even at all. But to wheel us back in, Neymar took that final penalty with all the theatrics with class, knowing that was probably going to be his last touch in a Brazilian jersey. He cried after the game was lost to Norway, and I truly did feel for him, because he knows more than anybody how much the World Cup meant to him and his country. You see, the parallel that once seemed offensive looks more innocuous than we initially anticipated. That cultural piece has layers. And let me add another one for you. The Premier League has earned enough dominance in Europe over the years that true individual dominance of his league would earn you a name in the lights, especially to Europeans. Rooney's club career solidified his name in lights, not just to club fans, but to all fans across the country and the continent. 5 Premier Leagues, 1 Champions League, 1 Europa, 4 League Cups, an FA Cup, and FIFA Club World Cup, and more. We recognize it as enough to hold him in the highest regard forever. Because the truth is, while we like to banter ourselves into believing that it's coming home, even when we don't believe it, England's last international major trophy was in 1966. If we measured all our English talents against their international success, there wouldn't really be much of a conversation now, would there? However, Brazilians are rightfully so spoiled in a way that the English are not. Winning the World Cup to Brazilians is heritage. It's a rite of passage, one that every generation has got to experience more or less. And so, a conversation amongst legends doesn't just rest on club contributions, but whether or not you brought the big boy home to its rightful owners by design. R9 is immortalized because he was present in 94 regardless, right? And 98, he carried Brazil to the finals, narrowly missing it due to health reasons. He collapsed before the game. You know, some go as far to say the Nike contract was so big at the time, there was no way the poster boy couldn't play the final. The conspiracy theorists got some stories about that one. But he just missed it in 98. Came back in 02 with a haircut many of us in primary school thought was okay to replicate, and it wasn't. A whole different weight class alongside Dino and a well-seasoned Rivaldo to do what he does best and bring it home. Listen, the South American powerhouses have this monkey on their back in common. Messi had the same monkey on his back his whole career. You know, had he not brought the World Cup home, La Masia baby would have been his name for the rest of his existence. Argentinians looked at him and thought, yeah, what you're doing over there is cool, but what have you done for us? Because Maradona did it for us. Brazilians looked at Neymar and said, Pele did it for us. Romario did it for us. And the underlying aspect of this cultural difference is a bias that might not even be their fault. Europe's elitist, maybe even classist mentality in the sport has resulted in a global culture that has widely accepted Europe as the domestic litmus test. To back your greatness at club level, if it doesn't happen in Europe, it almost doesn't count. It doesn't weigh a feather on our scale. Now, whether I personally agree with this is a different sentiment altogether, but that has been the status quo for a long time. While Jamie Carragher was wrong for his sentiments about the African Cup of Nations, Jamie, we didn't forget, but if you play that take back with how the 2026 World Cup is playing out, it aged horribly. Yuck. But we can't act like Jamie's sentiment is exclusive. Some of us might not be that far on the spectrum, but we still have a European domestic bias. And maybe South America's prestige or emphasis on the importance of winning the World Cup to solidify your greatness is in some sense a response or byproduct to those conditions, on top of them just being that good and creating the expectation through success. But what I mean is, Neymar was always at a structural disadvantage and always facing an uphill battle, whereas Rooney's social determinism was always at an advantage, at least in how their narratives would be shaped. Rooney from the beginning would never have to win an international major trophy, have an amazing club career like he had, and we were always going to champion him as a country and hold his name in the lights, as one of the greatest English players of all time. Neymar, however, now ish mom. Neymar could have collected every European accolade with Barca, PSG, whoever, and finished his career with no World Cup, and to Brazilians, his story would be incomplete. Because not only is that where culture differs, but that is the conversation amongst the legends that came before him from Brazil. That is where the narrative branches off. Guys, Neymar won a Brazilian Cup, a Copa Libertadores, a Recopa, 3 Paulistas with Santos alone, a Spanish Super Cup, 3 Spanish Cups, 2 La Ligas, a UCL, a FIFA World Cup, a FIFA Club World Cup with Barcelona, 5 Ligue 1 titles, 3 French Cup titles, 2 French League Cup titles, a Confederations Cup, a gold Olympic medal with Brazil, and let's be honest, he was a key part of all those accolades for every club he played for. Yet the storyline still somehow felt incomplete to us. Because he didn't win a UCL with PSG and he didn't win a World Cup with Brazil. Man, I remember watching the UCL final, PSG against Bayern. Bayern took the trophy, but my goodness, I watched Neymar try. I watched Neymar single-handedly try to put it on his back, and it wasn't Mbappe's greatest performance. At times, Neymar was isolated, but to no avail. You see, I have this thing when it comes to the greatest players on the biggest stages. To me, those are the moments I judge whether you're world-class or not. And that's just me. It's not about whether you produce a magical moment, lift the trophy, because you can't always have it your way. But to me, it's about whether you show up. Win, lose, or draw. Did you show up? And showing up doesn't always mean having a great game, but showing up does mean being in the game. Too many times players have had bad games, not because it went horribly wrong. No, but because they went missing. And contrary to popular belief, in my book, if you show up and you try everything you can, you get on the ball, you try to make it happen and it fails time after time, but you keep trying and you don't go missing and you don't hide, you leave it all on the floor, that is not having a bad game. That's not what having a bad game means. That's just unfortunate. That's just not your day. Fortune favored someone braver on that day, but you can hold your head high knowing you gave it a shot. And from my memory of that day, Neymar gave it a shot. Maybe not his best one, but he gave it a shot. The gift of talent is that you're good, but the curse of greatness is our expectations for you are out of this world. And our expectations of Neymar, well, they've been otherworldly. But the catch-22, we would never place those kind of expectations on someone unworthy. And on that international piece, both Rooney and Neymar played in down periods of their respective national team strengths. Let's be honest, seasons were changing. The cycle of national teams takes time. So maybe we do have to give them both some grace on that front. Rooney tried to play through a major tournament with a fractured foot. I'm all for the power of the mind to reduce the injury and all that. But what is a fracture? Stop being cute. If it's fractured, it's broken. Right? And Neymar's 2014 World Cup squad pales in comparison to the 2002 Brazil. Forget the front three, that 2002 Brazil team featured Carlos, Cafu, Lucio, Dida, Gilberto Silva, Juninho, Edmilson, even a 20-year-old Kaká and more names. I don't think Neymar has ever played in a Brazil team as complete or as decorated. Ronaldo carried Brazil in '98, and his fatigue in that tournament was so visible that when he was forced to play in the final, he looked like a shell of himself. He looked ghostly, and that '98 team still had the likes of Dunga, Rivaldo, Zé Roberto, Carlos, Cafu. But when he circled back in '02, as amazing as he was in that tournament, he had some Avengers with him. Wayne fell into the England fold at the end of the golden era and was given the responsibility of being the golden boy in what I think is honestly the middle passage. It was dark. I'm not trying to make excuses for either of them, but a consistency I've highlighted up until now is that context can't be ignored or forgotten in these conversations. And my actual point is that when you inspect them both a little closer, the string that ties them together might be a little stronger than you initially anticipated. Rooney had a phenomenal career, but I remember a point in the United team where Ronaldo and Rooney was a real conversation. It can't just be me who remembers. It ended quickly, but there was a window. And not CR7, he came after. Cristiano Ronaldo went on to win Ballon d'Ors. You couldn't convince me between 06 and 07 that Rooney weren't just as talented or arguably more talented. That's not crazy to suggest. So I think Rooney fell short of his potential? No, not even close. I wouldn't say that. But if you ask me, did he reach his fullest potential? I might also say no, because he was that good. And if an English person of the 80s and 90s says other names, they'll most likely say Gazza. And that just reconfirms everything. Because Gazza and Rooney are most definitely from the same lineage and family tree of football player. You go back further, names like Glenn Hoddle, Bobby Charlton might come up, but I don't have the capacity to argue against that. I just wasn't there. But in my young life, my pops made me watch the game tapes of Hoddle. And at the time, he was managing Tottenham. And you know, when you're young, you really only respect success. So I was slagging him off, saying he's a crap manager. And my pop said the 2000s equivalent of do your Googles. You need to understand who this man is. And he dusted off the VHSs. And I couldn't believe the Tottenham manager at the time had that much source and ability as a player. In '02, if you had asked me to guess what position Glenn Hoddle played, just off his mannerisms and his flair as a coach, a decorated number 10 would have been the last position I would have guessed. Sorry, Glenn, but it's the truth, right? And you know what else I think's amazing? Bobby Charlton training with the United team before the UCL final in '99. That was beautiful to see. He was kicking on by that point too, 61 and still teched up. Brazil, you might hear a few names: Romario, Pele, Ronaldinho, R9, Zico, Socrates for the cult classics. Again, different eras have different heroes, but what separates them more than ability is cultural identity. So when I finally understood why I didn't like the debate about Rooney and Neymar, it wasn't because they were two players that just felt so different. Even though that's true, it was because we failed to acknowledge that the real conversation wasn't a preference of playing styles or ability. It was cultural identity. It was an admission of one's cinematic preference. This is England, Kes and Football Factory, or City of Gods, Lina de Paz, or Casamento. It's not this or that. It's not dry humor or samba, carnivals or pubs. In fact, you appreciate them both for what they are. But they do exist on different ends of the spectrum. And that's the conversation between Neymar and Rooney. Similarly to Jude and Pendry in some sense too. The difference in their playing styles is also culture. Neither's better or worse. It's the agreed upon perfection of both cultures. Just what do you prefer? What lives within you? Joga bonito or get stuck in? And culture typically is shaped by the lens you see the world through. So our views of football and how it should be played will more times than not always be biased towards our cultures. What's interesting is that the film analogy I used before is an interesting metaphor. Why? England made films about football fans and football, but Brazil made films about people whose lives included football. Football in England is mostly defined by institutions. If you didn't play Sunday league, district, academy, non-league professionally, did you even play? Someone who just truly loved cage football and played on the street can't really say he played football in England. But in Brazil, football is defined through everyday life, the streets, the neighborhood, possibility. You see the videos. Juggling is culture, man or woman. That's normal in Brazil. But to the English, unless you were part of the institutions, expecting a random person on the street to have a first touch or do around the world is a shot in the dark. And that isn't talent or a lack thereof per se. That's just more so culture. For many of our young kids, they find institution before they find imagination. But in Brazil, they find imagination before they find institution. We tell our young to learn to color inside the lines. They tell their young just color, the lines will come later. And the saddest part about Brazil now is they're drifting further away from that culturally. Because of economic growth, environmental changes, many young players leaving Brazil too early, rule changes that strip away Brazilian identity like rainbow flicks being banned. But that's a convo for another day. But ultimately, Rooney is England's idea of completeness, work rate, sacrifice, directness, someone who does everything that's needed, even when it isn't glamorous. And Neymar, Brazil's idea of expression, freedom, improvisation, individuality, someone who makes football look like something you're not supposed to structure. Improvisation versus organization, celebration versus restraint, colorful confidence versus tamed humility. And when you see it like that, the debate starts to collapse. Because you stop asking who is better, and you start asking why we thought they were comparable in the first place. Because even comparison is culturally constructed, not objective. So to bring it full circle, that's why Rooney and Neymar are the same player. Not because they play the same or even have parallels in their careers, but because they are mythology manifested. They are ideas cultivated and their respective culture's perfect player, or at least the closest embodiment to the perfected football player that we have seen. Because Rooney is to English culture who Neymar is to Brazilian. Carlos, pass me the aux chord. The aux chord, the end of Kanye West, family business. Kanye is one of those artists where people talk about him like he is one thing, but he's never really stayed one thing long enough to define him properly. College dropout Kanye feels like a different version and artist personified to 808's Kanye. And that feels different again to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy Kanye. And again to Yeezus. And again to everything after that. At some point, you stop asking what Kanye is and start noticing what Kanye creates in other people. Because the interesting thing isn't about Kanye's albums. In real time, it appears that. Is it a good album? How good is the music? Where does it rank amongst his discography? But again, over time, we realize that might not be the question. It might actually be what comes after them. It's who each of Kanye's contributions allow the rest of the world to be. Kanye's importance isn't as self-absorbed as it's perceived on the surface, because behind the grandiose displays of ego, he's liberated so many and given them the green light to follow the sound in their hearts, the sound that gets copied, the confidence that gets normalized, the ideas that stop belonging to him the moment they enter the culture. All of those ideas can be lined up against his discography. You see, his discography doesn't just exist as a display of his own talent. Each exists as a representation of a different child that exists dreaming in color, in rhythm, and in rhyme of what it should sound like. The greatest artists don't create followers, they create possibilities. And the first person who planted this seed? A friend of a friend. My brother Raya's brother Jack posed a thesis over 10 years ago. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was along the lines of, we're all Kanye's children, it's just a question of which Kanye sound or album birthed you. Many of us are Kanye's boom bap children. Those who are didn't just borrow just sound, maybe even perspective, humor, sarcasm. Kanye was not the first boom bap rapper or producer, nor was he the only or out and out undisputed best. But the kid from the Shire with a backpack on and a polo cultivated something few did with his contributions. Because by the time we heard what if somebody from the Shire that was ill got a deal on the hottest, right? He had fractured rap. We are not going to get convenient amnesia and not remember a time when mainstream rap where it felt like if you weren't from the streets or street adjacent, we only cared so much. So much so that we can't act like Eminem's trailer park background wasn't adjacent enough for us to also accept him as one of our own. Had he been a white boy from the suburbs or college at that time, I'm not saying he wouldn't have been here, but would he be here to the extent that he is now? Are we going to act like rappers faking shootings outside radio stations for credibility wasn't a real thing? Or whole street personas being created wasn't a thing? Like mainstream hip hop didn't show De La and Tribe to the train station to fly in gangster rap at the turn of the 90s. Kanye fractured that and cut through the yellow tape in the mainstream. Dilla and many others hold their influence, over him, but we very quickly realized we wasn't just an artist. This was a culture shifter, a culture carrier. I have said it off the record and I'll be on record officially saying this. I truly believe Kanye has the best hip-hop trilogy of all time. Kanye's trilogy all stand alone as 3 individual masterpieces, 3 consistent concepts that tie together harmoniously. Which one you prefer is a real conversation, matched by how it was received in real time and how good the music actually was. When compared against himself, they stood their ground. College dropout, late registration, and graduation exist as timestamps in our life, and you didn't even have to go to school to relate. I could go through lyrics, tracks, and more, but we'd be here for a long time. We all went down one road and realized that wasn't the road for us. College dropout. We all had an idea and took longer than we should have to execute it. Late registration. And we all saw something through to the end to see the rewards. Graduation. And hopefully you realized that you were a champion. You see, a genre dominated at the times by street credibility, politics, and edge. A preppy college dropout in a backpack and polo that didn't just produce, but rapped to, said, I'm him. And there isn't a backpack rapper who came after who didn't take something from him. But when the trilogy ended, it felt like so did the Kanye that we knew. Even amongst the trilogy, we saw changes in Ye's behavior from then. But let's focus on the sound. Because where he went after graduation a year later revolutionized hip-hop. Again. In came 808s and Heartbreak. Kanye is not solely responsible for this sound, nor was he responsible for the sped up sample and pitched up vocals that centered itself in the early 2000s of hip hop. But if Jay's death of autotune was a sniper sent to John F. Kennedy T-Pain's career creatively, then Kanye's 808s was the defibrillator sent to save T-Pain's life and say, you've got so much more to give us. While we often give the crown of Rockefeller production to Kanye, he sat along producers like Bink, Just Blaze, Heatmakers who had their own signature sample spin, and many more. Not to mention his OGs and predecessors like No ID, Dilla, Pete Rock, Primo, LES. The list is endless in their contributions to boom bap. Q-Tip, many others. 808 was no different. He didn't do it alone, but we would be lying if we didn't acknowledge 808s and Heartbreak bringing the green light we spoke about earlier. Each time Kanye shifted, he sealed the shift that was already happening with his signature and gave credence to a whole generation still dreaming. After 808s, it was My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. At each point, he gave his signature. Each body of work was the seal of the times. And when we look at the tree that comes directly from him, many of them became the same signature seal for a subculture beneath them. The trilogy clearly inspired Cole, Wale, Kendrick, Crip, Blue, Chance the Rapper, Childish Gambino, Big Sean, right? Not to say those artists weren't inspired by others, but we saw Ye's fingerprint in all of them, and many others. And Ye was also inspired. The second wave, 808s inspired Drake, Cudi, Future, Doug, Juice WRLD, The Weeknd, Post Malone, Travis Scott, Uzi, Dark Twisted Fantasy, Tyler, JID, Keem, and even K-Dot found structural inspiration in this era. Yeezus, Playboy, JPEG Mafia, Yeet, and many are cross-era inspired like Drake and Kendrick who could apply to multiple eras of Ye. Quite poetic being that they're at the forefront of the mainstream world right now, right? Even to a young me, when Ye and 50 went head-to-head in their album release campaign and dropped on the same day in 07, it was clear that it wasn't just a battle of sales. It felt more like a ceremony, a changing of the mainstream guards. 50 represented the old guard, the streets. Kanye represented the shift. Mainstream rap had reached a new day, and mainstream rap was making room for the cool kids who weren't necessarily street-oriented. That wasn't just a graduation for Ye, it was a graduation for all of us. The legacy here isn't industrial production alone, it's permission. Permission to make uncomfortable music in the mainstream, to experiment with ideas even when they might not be complete. And that's just music, let alone what he did to fashion culture. Kanye shares a common thread with Rooney and Neymar now that I think about it. Stick with me. The mythology being immortalized. Kanye isn't a person. Kanye is an idea, oftentimes an idea cultivated by many minds and packaged as one. Hip-hop fans accept Kanye as a rapper, knowing that what they're truly referring to is the assistance of GLC, Consequence, Sci-Hi, Rhymefest, and others. Because Ye is not one person, he is an idea that constantly shifts, but nevertheless an idea perfected. In fashion, similarly, his relationship with Virgil and others. Kanye is the process of bringing together the right team to extrapolate the vision that Kanye is being bombarded with daily. Putting together the right people is a genius we often take for granted. but it's a genius nonetheless. The controversy, of course we had to address it, but I'm going to address it in a way that separates it from legacy, not because he should be void of judgment or I'm a separate the art from artist kind of person. I hate to break it to you, I'm not. But because Kanye's legacy isn't him, it's that Kanye kept ending, and every ending started someone else's career. Every Kanye end isn't an ending at all. It's just the moment his ideas stop exclusively belonging to him. The family gets bigger. Now each reinvention isn't an idea, but a new branch of the family tree. Kanye hasn't had multiple careers because he couldn't settle for one identity, but because each identity was influential enough to become someone else's beginning. And that's the irony. The irony is, the first Kanye probably ended the day that Graduation won in 2007. Jay in his Breakfast Club interview said Kanye is like the Indian who goes over the hill and gets hit by the cowboys and comes back and says, yo, there's a lot of them over there. And it makes sense because I thought immediately about Alexander the Great, who didn't conquer Egypt, name it Alexandria and settle. No, he left it to Ptolemy to run and he continued east. In the same way, when Kanye reached the peak of any version of himself, he abandoned it and left it behind for others to carry forward, moving on to the next version. Despite his controversy, despite his outlandish remarks, he doesn't explain. And regardless of how you feel about him personally, every time Kanye West ends, a new Kanye West begins. Kanye isn't in the music business or the fashion industry, he's in the family business. And like he said on the record, you tell me you ain't did it, then you ain't did it. And if you did, well, that's family business. Because we all have a crazy cousin, brother, sister, auntie, uncle, parent, but we love them no matter who they are. We don't excuse their behavior, but there is a charm to their idiosyncrasies. But again, we do not excuse their behaviors, but they're still family. I can't tell you how many times I thought, he said what? He did what? Damn, this might be the end of Kanye. And it typically was. But it was never the type of end that we initially thought. It was just the end of that idea and the beginning of a new one. Because again, Kanye isn't a person. Kanye is an idea immortalized and mythologized. But the idea of Kanye, the end of Kanye, was always the beginning of someone else. Usually someone new that we love. And that's his real legacy, genius, or whatever you want to call it. The permission he gave others to be over and over and over again. You see, the college dropout gives permission to the kid who doesn't fit the mold, the one who doesn't want to fit in. Late registration gives permission to be ambitious without abandoning soul. Graduation gives permission to think globally and bigger than where the story began and the confines of boxes. 808s and heartbreak give permission for boys to be emotionally vulnerable. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy gives rap permission to make art as grand as any art form. And Yeezus gives permission to be abrasive and experimental and misunderstood. The Life of Pablo gives permission to be unfinished and contradictory. And when you start from the bottom and get to the top, you realize you were building something. You were building something brick by brick. Not Maslow's hierarchy of needs per se, but a hierarchy of creative permissions. Each Kanye album doesn't replace the previous one. It assumes you've already been given the previous permission and asks you to take another step. And that's why one Kanye has to end for another to begin. You can't take a step backwards once you've taken a step forward. Kanye's family business just doesn't allow you to. The ignorance that was once bliss will not forgive you. So the step behind you disappears. Step 1, the college dropout, permission to be different. You don't have to become who they expect you to be. This is the foundation. Before you can create, you have to first believe you're allowed to exist outside of the script, outside of the norm. Step 2, late registration, permission to grow. Being different isn't enough. Refine it. Move at your own speed. It might even take a little longer. Now, difference becomes craft. Step 3, graduation, permission to dream bigger. Stop asking if you belong. Start asking how far you can go. The world gets bigger. Step 4, 808s, permission to feel. Success doesn't exempt you from being human. The internal world opens up. Step 5, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, permission to create without apology. If you're going to make something, make it as big as your imagination demands. Not confidence, conviction. Step 6, Yeezus, permission to be misunderstood. Most artists spend their careers trying to be accepted. Yeezus almost says acceptance is optional. That's a huge psychological leap, and I for one believe being understood is overrated. Step 7, the life of Pablo. Permission to be unfinished, to be contradictory, to be multiple things at once. But the hierarchy isn't about ascending into a higher being. No. That's the difference between Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the hierarchy of creative freedom. It's about expanding creative freedoms rather than ascending. You don't outgrow the earlier permissions, you carry them with you. The hierarchy isn't about becoming better, it's about becoming less constrained. And the irony is, Life of Pablo feels less constrained than College Dropout as a project, but Life of Pablo also feels less complete than College Dropout as a project. There's more albums, and what the others write, I'll leave to you. I'll let you decide. I gave you the first 7 steps. What steps are you on in your creative life journey? I'm in need of a trim though. Let's head over to the Barbershop. Barbershop Bootlegs. It grew on me. We change more than the films we watch. Belly, are you ready? What's going on? However do you want me? However do you need me? However. Take a look around. Firstly, shout out to Soul to Soul. My goodness, generational joint right there, sir. I didn't actually really love Belly the first few times I saw it, I'll be honest. Honestly, for years I didn't. I appreciated the space it held in culture like most hood classics. Let's be very clear. Most hood classics are terrible movies, but we love them. There's a separate category for them. There's a couple that are genuinely good movies, but most of them are not, right? However, they tend to have a redeeming quality about them that typically shines through all the madness, right? Friday gave us quotables for days that have transcended generation after generation. My favorite part of the first Friday, hands down, when Red tries to get his bike back from Debo and he pulls up with his dad and Debo knocks Red out and turns to his old man and says, "You want some of this, old man?" And Red Pops turns and says, "No." The way his whole body said no gets me every time. See, you remember Friday After Next, you know, the beautiful KD Orbert. I ran into KD at the airport in Miami and she was one of my childhood crushes. Look, I don't have crushes anymore, I'm a big man, but she had my heart growing up, as did Reagan Gomez, right? Reagan was probably number 1. But anyway, I ran into KD. I had to tell her in person, man. KD is aging like wine and not milk. She looked amazing. So like I was walking to my gate, right? I saw Beanie Man and his people and I said, "Wagwan, Beanie Man." And he said, "Wagwan, Ras." 2 to the chest, so we kept it pushing. You feel me? Miami Airport is a crazy place because I walked past the gate going to DR and it was like a BBL waiting room sponsored by Drake. But anyway, I'm losing focus. Hood movies. Terrible movies, but great cultural timestamps. And so we have a separate list for the best hood movies, right? We all do, I do. And we know we're not saying that these are incredible cinematic masterpieces. Nah, we just know this is a list of the best hood joints. Belly is still a wild movie, but it grew on me. And I want to talk about why. It always felt like a long music video. Granted, it was directed by none other than Hype Williams, responsible for many music video masterpieces, you know, back when the budgets felt endless. Belly was always style heavy, fragmented, almost more atmosphere than structure. Some shots felt out of focus, like when X is playing basketball and he gets approached by the agents. I watched that scene and think, no good thought or bad thought, just interesting camera choice. Some of it is insane, like Tommy's 16-year-old shorty. We're not going to ignore that. But we're also not going to act holier than thou as if it wasn't a reality where we come from. But arguably one of the greatest movie intros of all time, not just the hood movie list too. It felt like 85% of the budget went on that first scene. But something happened. Over the years, I'd revisit it like all the hood classics, sporadically, never planned. Boys in the Hood, Menace, Paid in Full, Shotters, Juice, Friday, In Too Deep. You ain't no Cap J Reed. I swear, most hood classics are comedies, man. You know the list though. From time to time, you throw one on for nostalgia, warmth, familiarity, some more than others, some you never really rewatch. But Belly started to rise as time accumulated, right? I started realizing I was watching it more frequently than the others. First, it wasn't even on my list, you know? Then it creeped into my top 10, then my top 5. Right now it's top 2, and I don't know if it's 2 as far as the hood classics go. The Wood is first. Yeah. One day I looked up though, and I had a deep, profound respect for the movie. I fought it at first, but then I had to ask myself, if you don't like this movie as much as you say, why do you keep coming back to it so much? And you know another movie I had to ask myself that same question with? Hitch, Will Smith. But today is Belly. I saw something in it that I didn't see before. And it wasn't that the film changed. It was me. The things that I didn't connect before suddenly felt intentional. What felt empty started to feel deliberate. It didn't improve. It just arrived later. Don't get me wrong. I always understood the concept from afar, but I felt cheated to an extent, right? As if the execution was more aesthetics than substance. But in time, I realized Belly is important. It's not just a hood classic. It might be one of the quintessential hood stories and movies of our time. See, look, I have always said to my friends, etc., you can never read the same book twice. You read it once, you put it down, you go and live life, you come back, pick it up again, and it's a whole different book. The words haven't changed, but you have. See, Buns and Sins have always reminded me of me and my right hand, my guy, my brother, right? I see parallels in our character. If I have to be honest, growing up, I was like Sin, right? The idea of going back to the motherland was a metaphor, for returning home. It didn't have to be physical, but mentally and spiritually going home, right? Always questioning if there was more, if our circumstances and environment was all that life had for us. So instantly, I gravitated towards him in the movie. Sin didn't feel like Nas was playing a character. It felt like he was playing an extension of himself. When Sin saw Shorty and told him, look, just make sure you rise above all the madness out here, mind elevation, F the petty, you don't need it, aight, done. I recognized it straight away. Sincere felt sincere because it was Nas. It was, I never sleep because sleep is the cousin of death. It was wisdom leaking out my grapefruit shoot. It was, I never brag, how real I keep it, cause it's the best secret. I rock a vest, prestigious, Cuban link flooded Jesus. In the Lex watching Kathy Lee and Regis. My actions are one with the seasons. I could keep going, but you get my point. Nas was always smooth, introspective. Queens wrapped in undertones of 5% knowledge, but street smarts nonetheless, right? And Sin in Belly was Nas personified. And Buns, he reminded me of my brother in many ways. Different, but some similarities. And DMX, the same personification. Buns felt like the same extension of X that Sin was of Nas. Wild, passionate, at times driven by the evils, but he represented an idea that opposed Sin's idea of elevation. Buns loved the streets, not because the streets were something to love, but because he never really questioned if there was more than that, right? His mind was so preoccupied that his hard drive didn't have the capacity to ponder those questions on top of everything that was tangible in his life amidst the chaos. So it wasn't that Buns and Sin were at war. They loved each other. It was just two ideologies that were at war, two paths on the same beaten trail. And maybe what changed in me isn't my understanding, because I understood then when I first watched the movie. Maybe it's how my story and my brother's story played out. You see, Buns ends up seeing what Sin saw all along. And when they sit down again in the food spot, both in the black leathers, Nas in the Gaultier style lenses that he raps about, back-to-back Benzes with the wild gremlins, Gaultier style lenses, talons in the 40 cal, this is lifestyle, let me find out you want the lifestyle of mine, no pal of mine, running with goons with knife wounds from jail time, got the squad looking like tycoons we all shot. But let me stop before I get carried away, right? The two beaten paths were no longer going in two different directions. Nah. See, they had reconnected back into one. And Sin would never have been able to make Buns see it, right? He wouldn't have. Buns had to take the long road to get there, and he had to get there on his own. Sin's love never changed for Buns. It was always there. And likewise, Buns loved Sin. I watched my brother take the long way to get there. But he got there safely. He got there in one piece. Belly is a story of redemption. Belly starts violently, but it ends peacefully. And truth be told, there was a long period in my life where I didn't truly believe that was possible. Maybe until my brother and I got there. So maybe that's partly why when I watch Belly now, I see it differently. Maybe me not seeing that possibility for us made me reject accepting it in the movie. Sincere left for Africa in search of redemption, and Buns had a spiritual awakening and changed his life course too. And I feel like that's the part we often glaze over. Unlike many crime films, Belly doesn't end with the main character simply dying for their sins or paying the price behind bars. It ends with the possibility of transformation. And I can't name too many hood movies or crime movies in general that do. You see, people remember Belly as hip-hop, violent, cool. But its ending is actually surprisingly reflective. It asks, what happens after the fantasy? Or even, can you become someone else? That's a very different film from the one people often describe. The journey in Belly is literally about the distance between who you are and who you're trying to become. The ending isn't saying that redemption is easy. It's saying that change begins with recognizing that the life you've been performing isn't the life you actually want. And that's the quiet irony of Belly. It's remembered for its style and aesthetics and Averex, Tim's, Echo, Levers, the Gaultier style lenses. But it ends by asking whether style without substance is enough. Belly is an optical illusion. At first, my eyes were drawn to hype cinematography, the blue lighting, the fashion, the music, right? The performances, the iconography. Your attention is constantly being pulled to the foreground, you know, as a test of your attention to see if your peripheral is keeping an eye on the background, right? The style almost acts like a misdirection, right? The contrast of Nas X and Hassan Johnson in Bunz's crib, the white decor with black furniture, art and trimmings matching their outfits, right? The beauty of Keisha and how the lighting was subtle, how her glow is present and her presence was ambient. It's hard not to get captivated by the visuals. From the club to the crib, your senses are set alight. Your eyes are aroused. Then somewhere later down the line, I stopped looking at the style and I started looking through it. And even though I had questions about the execution, I started trying to get to the root of where the movie was trying to go, even if it didn't all the way reach it. And suddenly, the question becomes, why is Sincere trying to leave? Why is Tommy restless? Why is everyone chasing something they don't even seem to enjoy? Why does the film end spiritually instead of violently? The film hasn't changed. Your attention has. And the cinematography that I once thought was a distraction was simply a delay. Clearly done intentionally. Hype knew what he was doing. And a man who spent a career making music videos to tell stories visually that match songs, you might, but I wouldn't put it past him. Not for a second. You see, the style isn't hiding the meaning. It's teaching you where you're looking. I mentioned Bun's crib, right? The white walls, the black decor, furniture, and the trimmings. Hype was visually expressing conflict that lived within Buns, right? Buns always saw the streets in a black and white fashion. It's this or it's that. When him and Sin are in the car and Sin asks him, like, yo, you think there's more than this? Or you think there's more to this? He instantly rejects the idea and says, there's life, there's death, and getting money in between. Now, I'm paraphrasing the dialogue, but, you know, that was ultimately the sentiment. The white walls themselves feel institutional to an extent even, right? The flashy bachelor pad feel, but yet it lived in contradiction. Our introduction to Keisha is elevated. Whether intentional or not, Hype's first framing of Keisha places her on a different visual plane to Tommy. On the staircase above the ground floor of the bachelor pad itself. She isn't introduced as part of his bachelor lifestyle on the ground floor. She's introduced above it, upstairs on the higher plane. The staircase that he has to climb to meet her is a spiral, not a straight. And if memory serves me right, he doesn't climb the stairs straight away, and she doesn't come down the stairs to meet him where he's at. And the contrast between Tommy Buns and Sin's crib? Tommy built a house. Sincere built a home. Books, family, conversation, warmth, and color. Sincere's crib even had clutter. Not dirt, but the type of clutter that is proof of existence, proof of life. Tommy's crib looks spotless, like there was no life inside it. Tommy's crib is curated. Sincere's crib is created. But this is what I've been trying to hit at all along. Because Tommy's crib isn't symbolic because it's white. It's symbolic because we notice the white before we notice his loneliness. Sin walked into the crib after the robbery and said, I love this crib, man. It's always reminded me of what I wanted to have. In that moment, Sin speaks to a reality a lot of us experience. We all have friends in relationships that they wouldn't give up for the world, but part of them still lives vicariously through the freedom their single friends display, whether an act or genuine. And Tommy Buns was not single, but he was lonely. But when life is moving at 100 miles an hour with an excess of money and power, loneliness can appear like freedom. But back to my point, we noticed the white before Tommy's loneliness, like how we noticed the blue in the club before the morality, how we noticed the clothes before the emptiness, how we noticed the style before the spirituality. Again, the cinematography wasn't hiding the message, it was revealing our priorities as viewers. Remember how I first said Belly felt like a long music video? Well, there's a striking contrast that exists that plays on that idea. The opening scene is a structural echo of what I have been saying the whole time. The song choice itself, soul to soul, Buns' soul to Sin soul, back to life, back to, right? A return, a reflection, emotional recalibration, a life of distortion being simplified, the redemption both are in search for. Because let's have it right, on the surface, Sin seemed less conflicted than Tommy, but the truth is they were both conflicted as each other, and that's why they were boys. But the key isn't the song choice, it's the version of the song he used and why that is so important. Hype used a stripped back version of the song, and that matters. We spoke about the hypnotic saturated visuals of the opening scene, how music video like it felt. So now imagine if the music wasn't stripped back, it would have actually been a music video. The audio doing the opposite of the visuals created tension. The image is excessive, the audio is restraint. It counterbalances itself, never fully allowing you to submerge into the surface. The image pulls you into immersion, the sound pulls you towards reflection, and the tension between the two is what created the delayed understanding that I am talking about. So while the image is pulling you into excess, the sound is pulling you somewhere else entirely, right? It's pulling you backwards, inwards, away from the surface, and that contrast matters because it means that the film isn't just trying to show you a world. No. It's trying to show you how easily you can get lost inside it. But remember, right? Remember how I said you can never read the same book twice? Well, I've watched Belly 100 times over the years, but I've only seen it twice. Hopefully, as have you. Because the first viewing reveals what captures your attention, and the second viewing reveals what deserves it. And so, no matter how many times you watch it, until you've seen it twice, you haven't seen it at all. And that's made me realize something this whole episode. Sorry, quick tangent. The distance between here and there, some distances don't shorten. There's actually a beautiful connection here that's written itself. I started off by saying, I didn't think Belly was a great movie for years, but I always appreciated the space it held in the culture. And when it grew on me, the movie didn't get better, but my understanding of it did. We always talk like meaning is something we reach, like there's a version of understanding at the end of things. But I'm not sure that's true anymore, because the more I look at it, the more I realize the gap never really closes. Rooney and Neymar doesn't become an easier debate just because we realize they're the same player or realize their cultural identities is what separates them most. Kanye's controversy doesn't become justified just because we map out his influence and errors, potential pun intended. Belly doesn't suddenly become clear just because we rewatch it. No, the distance is still there. It just starts to show its shape. Here is what we experienced. There is what we think it meant. And the space between them doesn't actually disappear. You see, the first time you watch Belly, Hype Williams isn't just showing you the film. No. Hype is showing you what your eyes value first. And only with distance do you realize you've been looking at the wrong layer. And I'm realizing that might be a consistency this whole episode. At first, the debate between Neymar and Rooney feels like a conversation about substance, ability. But only with distance do you realize you've been looking at the wrong layer. The distance between them isn't ability. It's culture. The wrong debate. The problem isn't that the answer was hidden. It's that we were looking in the wrong place. And I've just realized it. We've really been looking in the wrong place. In Rooney and Neymar's case, here by proxy might be our cultural lens of football, how we see the game. There might be the Brazilians' cultural lens. Here is the style that both exhibit. There is the culture that the style is born from. Here is where the debate starts, and there feels like where it should end. But that's part of the mistake that we make. You see, the gap between interpretation never resolves. The debate between who is better hasn't been resolved. Cultural equivalence has just emerged, and the distance between here and there doesn't shorten. Look, in Ye's case, here might be the controversy because it's the first thing or the last thing that surrounds his name. And many of us don't want to overlook that to go there, which is further away. There, well, that means there is the legacy of Ye, the end of Kanye we spoke about that gives permission to be. And funny that there is the end of Kanye, but it's also where people don't care to travel in his regard. But if we zoom in on his there, another here and there exists, right? If here is the permission, then there is the place you get to when you accept that permission and you act on it. Here is the hierarchy of creative freedom. There is where restraint doesn't exist. You know, the gap in between doesn't shorten if you do nothing with it. But if you do, the gap is only as far as you mentally decide. The distance between here and there doesn't shorten. The distance is either far away or the distance doesn't exist at all, right? I think about belly. Here is what we experienced, right? The surface of it, the foreground. There is what we think it meant beneath the surface, the background. What hype was trying to execute. The idea that may not have fully manifested, you know? Here is the first viewing that I spoke about where we're pulled towards immersion. And there is the second viewing where we're pulled back towards reflection. The gap between immersion and reflection doesn't shorten either. So whether it's Rooney and Neymar or Kanye versus controversy or Belly's execution versus the idea, ultimately it's all the same mistake. The gap between interpretation and meaning never resolves because the system isn't built on answers, it's built on pressures between interpretation. They're philosophical coordinates. It's a philosophical coordinate system, right? Things don't instantly become clear. The distance stays, but its structure becomes more visible. And what this tangent has made me realize is we mistake arrival for understanding. Yeah, we do. And a beautiful example of this is the journey versus the destination. Many of us are always striving to get there, to arrive to a destination, because a destination or there is a symbol of hope. Where are you going? I'm just heading over there, right? A symbol of change, a torch that turns the unknown into a known. So many of us convince ourselves that once we make it there, everything will be exactly what we always dreamed of it to be. For many reasons. But the main one being that maybe, just maybe here just doesn't feel complete. And like I said before, the gap between interpretation and meaning never resolves. So we go on a quest thinking that the answers we don't have here will be answered there. And along the way, we see signs on the road, directions, cameras, speed limits, you name it, trying to tell us things that we either heed or we ignore. But the distance between here and there doesn't shorten. And for most of us, it takes a lifetime to realize it. The destination gave you purpose, and purpose is good. But you were so focused on getting there, you failed to realize that the most important part was here. How many times have you heard people you thought were great or achieved so much say, I didn't realize what we were actually doing or making in real time. But when I look back, I go, damn. Or something along those lines to that sentimental effect, right? But you hear an admission that they didn't appreciate the journey as much as they maybe should have. Because when you strip everything away, down to zero, the destination is just an idea. The journey is the actual lived experience, and the journey isn't there. The journey exists here. Man, now, I'll tell you a story. I moved halfway across the world at 16 years of age by myself. I had so many trophies, medals, awards, tangible mantelpieces, and jewelry of a decorated career of achievements. But when I moved across the world, not a single trophy, medal, or whatever came with me, but the memories did. Think about a football tournament, for example. Anything you compete in, you play to win, to get to the end and lift the trophy or get the medal. That's the destination, right? To be crowned winners. And if you have been lucky enough to achieve anything of that nature, remind yourself, when you get there in the end, how long did it last? You collect it, you cheer, you jump up and down, you look around for a bit, and it's over. On to the next. The moment of arrival itself is short-lived. Dare I say, underwhelming at times even. But what you never forget, the part that lives with you forever, it's the journey and process of getting there. Every battle, every duel, every moment you didn't see a way but you found one. Every time you was down bad but never out. Every time you saw something in yourself that you didn't know was there. The here, the now, the present, the process, the journey. That's what lives forever. That's what stories are made from. That's where understanding is born. Not at the arrival, not at the end, but when you're in it, in the grit, getting it. The purpose I mentioned before that a destination gives you is good, but even the destination knows something that it hopes you figure out by the time you get there. The destination hopes that by the time you get there, you realize it was never about him. Nah, it was never about the destination at all. And by the time you look up, when you're close, you realize how much you've acquired along the way. See, in the beginning, he wants you to think it's about him, right? About the destination, because the goal is to get there. And that is enough to get you moving. And movement is vital in anything you do. But along the way, there's lessons that you're supposed to learn. And when you realize these lessons, you realize it was never about the destination. It was always about the journey. See, I've realized over the years, happiness isn't a state that you arrive at. It's a method of traveling. Because being happy or being a positive person doesn't mean you're on cloud 9 every day. No. Being positive is not the absence of negativity. Being happy is not the absence of pain or sadness. It's about your perception of what you are enduring. We have positivity ourselves into a generation where people ostracize people going through hard times and call them negative people because we misunderstood what it means to be positive. Positive isn't being happy-go-lucky 24/7. That's not real. It's knowing that when you are going through hardships, that when you are going through it, that no matter what you're going through, it won't last. Because being positive isn't about what you're going through, but how you choose to go through it. And the difference between a negative person and a person that's going through a tough time is simply just their perspective on what they're going through. By all means, sure, cut off a negative person, but you don't cut off a person going through a tough time. Being positive is knowing that ups and downs are normal. Not suppressing your emotions because they're sad or negative emotions. It's holding the door open for what you feel, knowing that good, bad, beautiful, ugly, or indifferent, every single one comes through the door of your being with something positive and intention and information that you need. It's not demonizing yourself for feeling anything or giving yourself the grace to without permission. Happiness is not there. It's here. And it's not arrival. It's how you choose to travel on your journey no matter where you are heading. Because ultimately, the destination doesn't actually matter. The meaning lives in between here and there, and it already exists, but your perception determines the meaning and its value, not the other way around. Think about the people you truly love. If you make plans to go somewhere, do you really care about where you go? Does the destination actually matter? Because I know for me, when I'm around people I love, we can do whatever. We can do nothing, but try know a time was had doing nothing. We could go anywhere, but try know a time was had wherever we went. Because it wasn't about the destination, but it was about the journey and the company. I keep saying it. It wasn't about there. It was about here. And believe it or not, we're all on the same freeway or highway of life. You can fly, you can drive in a two-seater, a family van, you can walk it, you can take the train, the bus, whatever you choose. But there's no two alike like a snowflake. You know what I've also learned along the way? That there's only two types of people that are in a rush. Yup. The person who doesn't know where they're going and the person who thinks that they're late. The only two. The person who doesn't know where they're going typically panics. Their compass and direction becomes erratic. So they panic, speeding up, trying to find their way and not lose time. Person B who's in a rush is in a rush because they feel like they're running out of time. Like the time frame where they were supposed to be is out of sync and they're behind schedule. Just think about it. How many times have you been on the train and you notice a person who looks a little lost, slightly disheveled, a little bit of panic in them and their head on a swivel? They tend to disrupt the natural rhythm of everything else that's around them. You've seen it before, right? And how many times have you noticed the clock watcher? The one who constantly is checking their watch or their phone and, in a slight panic, slightly agitated. And if it's early enough during the week, you know they're late for work. They might have overslept and not heard the alarm, but you can see it. It's written all over their aura and demeanor, right? They're late, behind on getting to their destination. See, me, if I'm late, why stress it? If it's out of my control at this point, I'm going to enjoy the journey regardless. Of course, there is a larger lesson there, which is plan better. But in real time, when that is no longer an option, I'm not adding additional stress on top of what I'm dealing with already. There's just no point. It doesn't get you anywhere. But what I will do is stay present and stay here, not let my mind drift over there. Kind of peeling back different layers and discovering more layers as I go, to be honest. It's kind of beautiful. Think even in the example I gave of the destination being somewhere a person goes every day. Work, right? The quality of their commute to the destination is entirely dependent on the journey and how they get there. If you don't prepare for the journey, the destination and journey becomes horrible. You can't even enjoy the morning commute or journey to work because you're already at a disadvantage. Another lesson being Godspeed. If you know where you're going and you know everything happens when it's supposed to and you're on time, you'll never really rush a day in your life. Even in matters of the heart, the same applies. We panic because we don't know where we're going. We rush because we feel like we're running behind or running out of time. But if we know where we're going and we know we're moving at Godspeed, you'll never actually rush a day in your life. Because even love isn't about the destination. Even that's about the journey. So many of us are left in heartache because it didn't go where we wanted it to go, right? The destination that we had in mind, and quite honestly, that's going to happen in life. But the sad part is we didn't allow ourselves to enjoy the journey. So when the destination didn't arrive, we felt robbed of our time and our resources. But what if we enjoy the journey more than the destination? What if the real value and the real love was in the journey the whole time? Because even if we don't arrive at the destination we intended, we still enjoyed the journey and how far it took us. Yeah, we were still able to get off at our exit because we realized the road was heading in a different direction than the one that we wanted to go in. The journey still took us closer to where we were already going in the first place. But because we knew where we were going, we were able to remain true on the road while we were heading in the same direction. And now it kind of sounds like it's getting a bit more complicated and contradictory. So I'll bring it home right here. Knowing where you're going is an individual journey, right? And when you know where you're going, nothing can really deter you. Because your individual journey doesn't actually change. You could change careers 1,000 times, but what you'll find out soon enough is you're the exact same person in every career because it's deeper than that. It's about who you are as a being. And when you get on the road of your individual journey, it's not a linear road, but it's a road of 1,000 zigzags. And when you understand that the destination is written, then you start to take the scenic route. Pay attention to the view. Stop off and admire the sights. Have conversations with strangers. Joyride with loved ones. And sometimes you might even find a companion or a partner along the way. And when you get in the car with a companion, someone who you're supposed to connect with, you realize if I know where I'm going on my own individual journey, it doesn't matter where this car goes. Yes, I would hope it's going where I'm going. But even if it doesn't, I'll enjoy the journey of where it takes me. Because if you're aligned and it's the right car and the right companion, it'll take you where you're heading. But not every car that's the right car will take you exactly where you need to go. Some will just take you closer to it. Some will take you away from it to test your will and resolve, and if your compass actually knows its bearings. You might get caught in one of those situations, right? But it's up to you to know when it's the right time to hop out of the car and take your exit. And the difference between a person that saw that car ride as a waste of time and a lesson that was for them and not against them is simply the difference between a person who only cares about the destination and the one who realized it was about the journey. It's that simple. It's the difference between a person who thought that arrival was understanding and the person who understood that the distance between here and there doesn't actually shorten. Nope. And what you start to realize is it's either far away or the distance doesn't actually exist, because they are just philosophical coordinates. And if you think the destination of where you're going will complete you, fulfill you, feed you in ways that you can't be fed here and now, the destination will always be too far away. But if you're fortunate enough to realize that the distance doesn't shorten when you have that mentality, and that here is where the true value lies and the journey is more important than the destination, well, then the distance between here and there actually ceases to exist. I like the distance between here and there. I like the fact the distance doesn't shorten. And I like the idea that the gap between interpretation and meaning never really resolves. And I like the fact that the meaning lives in between, and that the meaning that lives in between is simply reframed or reimagined by our perception. We measure life by destinations, but we experience it through distances. And maybe even calling it a journey is misleading, because journeys imply there's somewhere we're meant to arrive physically. But life doesn't really work like that. The arrival is mental, spiritual even. The moment you reach one destination, it immediately becomes the starting point for the next, like Kanye we spoke about earlier. And the irony is we spend years chasing moments that we only get to experience once. Think about it. Winning a trophy or graduation, marriage, promotion. Those are moments measured in minutes. You know, the distance that created them is measured in years though. Those are moments measured in minutes, but the distance that created them is measured in years. And so I leave you with a quote by Kierkegaard, who once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." And I say all that to say, I'm Zaire, never trade your grapefruits for grapevines. And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I remember it differently. Until next time, peace. Even better than I was the last time, baby. And we back. Man. Episode 3. Ep 3. I even bought out the Sergio, the banana yellow. I had to bring out the banana yellow Sergio Tacchini. Yes, sir.